If not, I mean, we'll go from there. Yeah, that's how we go. Thank you.
We'll talk about it next week because it's we'll have our perspectives also. I'll try to put it up.
Oh. Story. Yeah. Judy, we got recordings on here? Manager Sabo? I'm good. Okay. All right. Good evening. This city council meeting is called to order at 8 p.m. on July 11th, 2023. First, may you please all join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
McHale is absent. Bud Matts is absent. O'Brien.
Here.
Veneziano.
Here.
Boucher.
Here.
Reyes. Here. Kohler.
Here.
With 5 present and 2 absent, there is a quorum. First item on our agenda is to approve the city council meeting minutes for June 13th, 2023 at the city council meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So move, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Alderman Boucher, for the second. Any corrections, additions, or deletions to those minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The ayes have it. Those meetings are approved. Which brings us to our second set of meeting minutes to approve for the June 20th, 2023 Committee of the Whole meeting. Please, may I have a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien, for the first.
Second.
And for Alderman Veneziano for the second. Any corrections, additions, or deletions to those set of minutes? Seeing none, the question is, shall those meeting minutes be approved? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Those meeting minutes are approved. Which now brings us to our first event of the evening, which is our Police Life-Saving Awards. And to that, I will defer to Chief Nowacki.
I'm right here, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. City Council members, you guys could all hear me. I take it. My kids always say I yell too much, so I got a lot of practice. Tonight is a very special night. Tonight, we are going to give 3 officers a life-saving award. Officer Gore, Officer Mack, and Officer Miller. If you want to come up here with me, keep me company. I said your officers of the hour. I also have a special guest here. I'm very excited for this. Kevin, if you could come up here front. Kevin is a Rolling Meadows resident, and Kevin is the reason these officers are receiving an award tonight. It's really great. It means a lot for me that Kevin is here today. I'm hoping that his story encourages people that do not know how to do CPR, get CPR trained. And I'll tell you how all these 3 officers' paths crossed with Kevin. It was early March of this year. Kevin had worked out earlier in the day. Later that night, about 10 o'clock, not feeling well, went to go lay down, asked his wife to bring him some aspirins. When his wife did come to give him his aspirins, Kevin was unresponsive. Kevin was essentially gone, was not breathing. His heart had stopped. Wife, outstanding, called 911 right away, didn't panic. These 3 officers showed up immediately. So how fortunate they were that these officers came here right away. They went upstairs. They cleared an airway. They started compressions. Also, our officers are equipped with AEDs, automated external defibrillators. Am I correct, Chief? Correct. So they applied that instrument to Kevin. It indicated that Kevin needed a shock. They took their hands off. They initiated that shock. And the next thing happened was a miracle. Kevin took a gasp of air, and his heart, which had stopped, slowly started to beat again. Kevin was really given a gift that time, a gift of a second chance. A lot of people don't get that. Because of that second chance, I don't know if these officers know, there's a person here today that Kevin would have never, if that did not happen and turn out that well, this person in this room would have never been able to see Kevin. She would only know Kevin through stories from their family and pictures, and that is his granddaughter. Your granddaughter's here today, right here. So Kevin was given, like I said, a chance to actually hold his granddaughter, where, like I said, if it wasn't for these actions of these officers, that would never have occurred. So these 3 officers are being awarded our life-saving award, and I will read that out to you. Like I said, I do want to thank everybody for being here. It really means a lot to these officers and actually to myself. The life-saving award, Rolling Meadows Police Department, presented to Officer Mack, Officer Agoric, and Officer Miller. As Chief of Police, it's my honor to present you 3 the department's life-saving award. On March 6th of this year at approximately 10 p.m., you 3 officers were dispatched for a report of a male who was not conscious and no longer breathing. All 3 of you, upon arriving at the location, went to the upstairs bedroom where the victim was located and immediately assessed the situation. The victim's airway was cleared to allow respiration, along with chest compressions being initiated. The life-saving piece of equipment, an AED, which officers are equipped and trained with, was utilized in this life or death situation. Through the quick actions of all 3 of these officers working as a team, using their training, experience, and equipment, the victim was able to resume a pulse and start breathing. The victim was then transported to hospital for further treatment. Ultimately, what could have resulted in a tragic situation with the loss of life turned into a celebration of life. The victim was given a second chance at life because of your actions. How fortunate he was to have you come to his aid with compassion, the necessary training, and the proper equipment to save his life. Officer Agoric and Miller, actions warrant the issuance of the life-saving award. It's awarded for their actions directly resulting in the saving of an individual's life. Your commitment to the Rolling Meadows Police Department, the community, and the law enforcement profession highlights the images of this department. Your actions are commendable and exceptional. Congratulations. Service announcement. If you do want to learn how to do CPR with the fire chief, how would I, if I was a Rolling Meadows resident and I needed to learn CPR, how would I do that?
So the fire department offers CPR classes once on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. And you can sign up on the city's website at cityrm.org.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. For you guys. I do have cake and coffee in my conference room, so everybody's welcome to go in there. Deputy Chief Searcher, do you? Congratulations. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right, thank you, guys. I'll try to get in there later, but if not, thank you.
Again, a huge congratulations to our police officers for receiving the life-saving awards and for making sure that when they are truly the first on the scene, that they're able to have the training to continue and act in those events. So thank you again. For those who are interested in learning CPR, the fire chief has stated again that there are those opportunities that you can find at cityrm.org. With that, we have an actuarial presentation and discussion on our police and fire pensions. And to that, I will defer to Director of Finance, Molly Talkington.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight, Kevin is here, Lauterbach David. He's our actuary, and he will be presenting an overview of our police and fire pension report.
Right. Wow. So this is going to be a lot less exciting than that. Sorry. That. I did pass around copies in paper to everybody in the council so that you can follow along in paper. I believe the presentation is also in your meeting packet if you prefer electronically to follow along with the results of this year's actuarial reporting. So as Molly said, my name is Kevin Cavanaugh from Lauterbach and Amon. Our firm has been engaged by the City of Rolling Meadows to complete 4 actuarial reports, 2 each for your fire and police pension funds. I'm here today to go over the results of those reports, try to keep my comments pretty brief. I see we've got a pretty long agenda, and so I'll just walk through that, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that anybody has on this year's results. So turning to that first page of my presentation, you'll see the bottom line results for this year. Most key results in this entire presentation is right off the bat here. The recommended contribution from the city to the fire and police pension funds is for the fire pension fund, $4,180,020. For the police pension fund, $3,389,941. For a combined total recommended contribution for this year in the amount of $7,569,961 for this year. Contributing these amounts is going to get these funds to 100% funded over approximately the next 14 to 15 years, utilizing this layered amortization method that's used in the development of these recommended contributions. You can see the prior year recommended contributions shown just below that. It's my understanding, and I'm sure Molly will speak to this a little bit further, that in last year, the city elected to contribute to match to the prior year's recommended contribution because we did see a decrease in the recommendation for both fire and police. Now this year, even factoring in the corresponding increases that you can see listed on the page here, it's still actually less than the 2 years ago amount. And so Molly's recommendation to council is going to be to stick with the 2 year ago number in order to avoid a decrease in levy. As we all know, it's pretty difficult to climb that levy back up. It's a lot easier to drop it down than it is to get it back up. You can see the unfunded liability for both of the pension funds. For fire, there's about $37.1 million of unfunded liability. For police, about $28.9 million. For a combined $66 million. Basically, the way you can think of that is that $66 million is the amount that would be necessary in funding to achieve a 100% funded status for both the fire and police pension funds for this year. Funded status for both fire and police. Fire sitting at about 58.26% funded, and the police pension fund at about 67.76. And just as a comparison point, the average fire and police pension funds in the state of Illinois operate generally within the 55 to 60% funded range. So for both your fire and police, fire, you're kind of right on track with the state average. Police is a little bit better funded than what the state average is for these fire and police funds. Turning to that next slide on page 3, you'll see the year-over-year changes in the recommended contribution. I won't go too much in detail on each one of these individual line items. There is further detail on them as we walk through the rest of the presentation. A couple of just points to mention is actuarial experience. That's really the demographic activity of both of the funds this year. So we'll show you that in a minute. And then one of the key contributing factors to this year's increase was a really, really tough economic year, calendar 2022. Pretty much across the board, with all of our clients, we work with almost 400 police and fire pension funds at Lauterbach and Amen doing actuarial reporting. I would say on average, returns for calendar 2022 averaged about negative 15%. For your fund, the fire returned about negative 14.77%, and police returned about negative 12.39% for this fiscal year. So really, it's not a consequence of any decisions that council has made or the pension boards. These funds are consolidated, they're invested as the same way with every other fire pension fund and police pension fund in the state. And calendar 2022 is just a really tough year with really bad downturn in equity markets as well as fixed income returns being pretty harshly negative historically, pretty bad. We did see contributions greater than expected on behalf of what the city put into both pension funds, which led to a reduction here. As you can see, the $36,000 reduction for fire, $39,007 for police, because the city put in about 101%, almost 102% of the recommended contribution over this past fiscal year. Turning to that next slide there, you'll see the two components on page 4 that make up the recommended contribution. The first of which is your employer normal cost. You can think of normal cost as the cost of ongoing benefit accrual for your active members. So that's essentially funding retirement benefits for each employee while they're an active police officer or firefighter employed by the city. The idea being that funding the normal cost every year should, in theory, get you to a point where when that officer decides to retire or that firefighter decides to retire, that effectively their retirement benefit should be funded in full. The reality is sometimes we lose on investments. The state decides to change plan provisions. Assumptions are changed over time. And so that's why we're not already sitting at 100% funded today. And you can see the other piece there that makes up the recommended contribution is the payment towards unfunded liability. That's the much larger component for both of the funds that makes up the recommended contribution. And that's really to get you to that 100% funded level using that layered 15-year amortization policy. Next slide on page 5 is going to show you the year-over-year demographic changes. I won't go too much in the weeds on this, but you can see for fire, high-level summary is there was 4 new hires entered into the fund, 2 retirements, 2 terminations, and none of the retirees or surviving spouses passed away during the year. So you can see the impact of those items. Similar summary for police on page 6. We saw 1 termination, 1 retiree and 1 disabled member who passed away during the year, both of whom had eligible surviving spouses. So you see those impacts on that page. Page 7 and 8 is basically a graphical representation of the active membership within the fire and police pension funds, showing you how old and how much service each member has. One way I like to look at this is to kind of consider for tier 1, so that's any member who was hired prior to January 1st of 2011. They're going to be in the tier 1 category. After that's tier 2. For a tier 1 member, in order to retire with full benefits, that would be age 50 with 20 years of service to get an unreduced benefit. And so that would be what we would consider the folks that are retirement eligible as of December 31st, 2022. For fire, there's basically 1 member. So if you look at that 50 to 54 and 20 to 24 years of service, there is that 1 member of the total 43 active members who is eligible to retire as of calendar year end 22. Similarly, on the police side, quite a few more retirement eligible individuals. There's, summing up everyone who is over age 50 and 20 or more years of service. We see that there's 9 of the 49 total active members are immediately eligible to retire, so they could commence retirement benefits at their convenience. Maybe some of them even have since calendar end. And so that translates to about 18%. So that's something for the council to be aware of, is that, basically 18% of the police officers that are being employed by the city are eligible to retire. That means you could see a pretty significant spike in retirements and increase in benefit payments coming forward in the future. And that just kind of stresses the point of how important it is to fund the pension fund.
Quick question on that. So what should the council, in a worst case scenario, if that were to take place, be prepared for as far as a percentage increase?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So actually, turning to the next page, it'll kind of give you a picture of what that might look like. So if you look at, I'll focus more on the police side since we have a lot more eligible retirees on that side. You'll see that benefit payments last year for police was about $4.4 million, so $4.392 million paid out in benefit payments during calendar 2022. We project that within the next 5 years, the police pension fund will be paying out approximately $5.7 million in benefit payments, and within the next 10 years, almost $7 million at the $6.96 million. So to address your point there, really the best thing the city can do is to continue the past practice of contributing at or above recommended contribution levels, and that's positioning the funds really well to handle this. When we look at these expected increases in benefit payments, all this is really wrapped into when we develop the recommended contribution, we are expecting to see these members retire soon. So with the city doing their part historically, a very fantastic job, at least over the last few years, certainly, of funding these pension funds. That's really putting you on track to be able to pay these higher benefits in the future.
Thank you.
And you can see a bunch more numbers on page 9 there, active and inactive member counts for both fire and police as well. Slide 10, kind of gloss over this one. It's actually not an assumption change. It's listed as an assumption change. This is basically indicative of the fact that we did review a new collective bargaining agreement with the police. And that runs from January 1, 2022 through December 31st of 2025. Comparing the new collective bargaining agreement against the old, we didn't see, it did not warrant any need for a change in assumptions. So basically what that means is projected salary increases on the new contract are approximately the same as what they looked like on the previous contract. So no change there. Some plan changes. Page 11, this does get pretty in the weeds. There's a lot of words on page 11. Basically, this is indicative of 2 key changes. The first bullet point there is a change that was happened at the state level, at the state of Illinois, passed a new piece of legislation that was effective January 1st of 2023 that provided for police who are married after they retire. Prior to January 1, if you were a police officer, you get married after you retire, your surviving spouse was not eligible to receive benefits upon your death. That's different on the fire side. So this new piece of legislation was enacted that basically says if you're a police officer, you get married after retirement, as long as you're married 5 years prior to death, then your spouse is entitled to receive the pension benefit that you were receiving at time of death, payable for 15 years, as long as once that spouse reaches age 62. So we did factor that into this year's valuation. Another item on here was a change in interpretation of statute from DOI, which is really in the weeds, which I won't get into too much, but a change in the way that Tier 2 benefits for disabled members are administered, change in interpretation of state statutes. Page 12 will show you the change in fair value of assets during the fiscal year. So this year, the fund, looking at the fire side, for example, fire started the fiscal year at $55.2 million in assets. Really tough was the return on investments for this year. Again, nowhere to hide, not unique to Rolling Meadows by any means, but the return did come in about negative $8.1 million, led to an ending net position this year for fire at $47.142 million. The police side, kind of a similar story, started the fiscal year $63.1 million. Investment return towards the middle there was a negative $7.75 million. All those other items were factored in as well, which led to the ending net position this year at $55.217 million for police. And you can see the returns. I quoted this earlier, but for fire, the return was negative 14.77%. For police, it was negative 12.39. We do calculate those returns net of all administrative expenses, not just investment related. So that covers like paying the actuary, paying all the different fees that are associated with the pension fund. The expected rate of return is a positive 7. So that is important to consider. We are expecting the funds to get a positive 7. This year, lost almost 15 on fire and a little more than 12 on police. So pretty big hit. And one way that we kind of smooth that in, or we avoid some of the volatility in the determination of the contribution and avoid a huge spike this year due to the investment performance, is by asset smoothing. So when we talk about the asset value, we use an actuarial value, not a fair value. Basically what that means is that each year we take the investment performance, we spread out that impact over a 5-year period rather than reflecting it in full in 1 year. So this year's investment loss, while it's shown here in the fair value of assets, is really only 20% of it is reflected in this year in the actuarial value of assets, and it will continue to be reflected over the next 4 years. Slide 13 shows some of our risk management comments. And so the first bullet point there we look at is we compare the total asset value against the inactive liability. In an ideal world, we're looking for basically the pension fund to have the dollar set aside to cover inactive liability. Think of inactive liability as current retirees, current disabled members, surviving spouses, deferred members, anyone who's no longer actively employed as a police officer or firefighter. And so that inactive liability for fire, for example, is $70.2 million. The asset value of the pension fund with this year's sustained investment loss is $47.1 million. So we recognize the fact that there is a shortfall there. Bigger on the fire side. On the fire side, it's a $23 million shortfall. On the police side, it's an $8.8 million shortfall. It's an important metric to look at. It's not necessarily the end-all be-all of pension health. Another metric we look at here is the second bullet point, the ratio of benefit payments to fair value. Ideally, we want this number to be low. Basically, if we look at the total asset value of the fire and police pension funds, we don't want to see the funds paying out, 15% of the total asset value of benefit payments every year, as that poses a pretty significant cash flow risk. For the fire side, the fund pays out about 9.92% of its total asset value in benefit payments over this last year. So it's a metric to look at. I will say that's a pretty steep increase year over year, and that's primarily because the asset value dropped so sharply due to the investment performance. So just for a reference point, for fire, last year that same ratio was 7.91%. This year it crawled up to 9.92%. If we see a good year in the market, we could see this tail off. Again, another thing the city can do to combat this is contributing at recommended levels, and that'll help to bring this ratio back down into the future. On the police side, kind of a similar story, not quite as heavy on the ratio there. The fund paid out about 7.95% of its total asset value in benefit payments last year. The prior year was 6.82, so we did see definitely an increase on that side as well. And we compare that against the expected rate of return on investments, because ideally what we want to see here is that if the ratio of benefit payments to fair value is less than the expected return, that basically tells us that if the fund does hit its metrics, it'll be enough, just investment earnings alone to be enough to cover benefit payments. So you're kind of in a position with both fire and police now where the amount of benefit payments that are going out the door exceeds the expected investment income coming in. That basically just means that city contributions and member contributions really have to be allocated to pay benefit payments in the short term. And then finally, at the bottom there, there's just an exhibit just detailing out how sensitive the recommended contribution is to the expected rate of return on investments. It's a key assumption in the actuarial process. Right now we use a 7%, so that's shown in the middle there. Gives us that combined recommended contribution for fire and police, as I've stated before, the $7,569,961. Hypothetically, if we were to use a 6.75 or a 7.25, you can see how that would change the recommended contribution pretty substantially, to the tune of about $500,000 to $1 million, depending on which way you go. For a reference point, the Consolidated Fire Pension Board, they hire their own actuaries. They do a separate valuation to determine a statutory minimum funding requirement. On the fire side, they use 7.125% for their expected rate of return on investments. So it's a little bit more aggressive than the 7% that we're using. On the police side, it's a little bit of the reverse. Police uses 6.8% compared to our expected 7%. So kind of right in the middle of the two with the 7% expectation. On slide 14, this would be the last slide from the funding report. This is what we call the alternative contribution. Basically, this is what if we were to determine per state statute, what would the contribution that the city would be statutorily required to make to get the funds to be 90% funded by 2040, which is the current minimum statutory funding policy. So you'll notice it's substantially less. On the fire side, that would generate a contribution of about $2.887 million instead of the $4,180,000 that's recommended. On the police side, 2.282 instead of the 3.389 that's recommended. So about $1.3 million discrepancy on fire, about $1.1 million on police, with obviously this number being a lot less than what the recommended level is. That being said, as I've alluded to a couple times so far, contributing at the recommended levels is definitely going to help ensure the future health of these pension funds and ultimately save taxpayers money. By getting money in these pension funds sooner, it prevents the growth of unfunded liability growing with interest year over year. So it is an important thing to consider in this process. On slide 15 here, we show this exhibit comes from the GASB 6768 report. This one's for fire. The next page is police. And so what's on page 15 is showing you in the second column there, how much has the city contributed? So that's really the total dollars that went in during the calendar year. So last year, for example, the city contributed $4,310,709 to the fire pension fund. You can stack that up against the recommended contribution, or the ADC, for that applicable fiscal year. And you'll see this year the city contributed 101.27% of the recommendation. So kudos to the city for doing their part to fund these pension funds really in a healthy, sustainable way. Over the last 5 years, on average, factoring in that 2019 was a really banner year, high contribution from the city. On average, the city contributes about 105.56% of the recommendation to the fire pension.
There was also a change in assumptions between 2019 and 2020. Isn't that correct?
Off the top of my head, I can't 100% confirm that, but that does sound, I believe that is correct. Yeah.
So, because it wasn't a change from the council to go from 115.82% of ADC to 101. It was that life expectancies and actuarial tables had been updated. So pretty much on trend.
Yeah, and we took over doing the actuarial reporting in 2018. There's generally a 2-year time lag between when we do an actuarial report and then when the city makes the contribution. So yeah, that would jive with the story that to see in 2020 why you see that big jump in that actuarially determined contribution that year.
Okay.
Similar story for police. I won't go as much in detail, but you can see on average over the last 5 years, the city has contributed that 106.41. And again, to the mayor's point here, you see that big jump between 2019 and 2020. Not quite as substantial on the police side as it was on the fire side. But again, that would be reflective of Lauterbach and Amon taking over as the actuary doing the reporting, updating the assumption set to be basically the best estimate of future increases. Slide 17 shows you your solvency test for fire. Basically, what we look for here is we want to see that solid black line stay above the dotted blue line. That's going to tell you that the fund is projected to be fully solvent or able to pay all benefits for the current fund membership. So that's the story that we see here for fire. It's a great conclusion. It does help the city a lot for the audit. If you were to be in a situation where the city wasn't contributing at recommended levels, you could see the solvency test fail essentially, which would mean there's a future insolvency that would reduce the discount rate and increase the liability on the village's balance sheet. So the city's really doing everything they can to keep that liability as low as possible on the balance sheet. For fire, you see pretty much the same story for police. The fund's projected to be fully solvent or able to pay all future benefits for current membership, assuming the city continues to contribute at recommended levels like they have. And that is my quick summary of this year's actuarial report. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has.
Thank you so much. At this point, are there any follow-up questions from the council? Yes, Alderman Kohler.
So I will admit to start my questioning that I'm probably the dumbest person in the room when it comes to pensions. But I have a whole bunch of questions because I read that report and got even more confused. So I'm just going to ask 3 questions. Number one, who manages the pension funds? Is it the state or is it locally or who does that manage?
Yeah, so good question. It's technically not the state. You know, a lot of people would say, oh, it's a state entity. It's a board that consists of elected officials that probably someone else could speak to this a little bit better than me, but it's the IFPIF and IPOPIF boards it's partially municipal, partially active firefighters and police officers, and partially retirees. So it's an elected board who manages the investments. And so that transition occurred over the last 2 years, really to move the funds from being locally managed by an investment advisor that was hired by the fire and police pension boards to now being done by, it's called IFPIF and IPOPIF, the Consolidated Police and Fire Pension Board. So they basically
For the state.
Essentially for every single they call it downstate fund. So every single fire and police pension fund in the state of Illinois, except for Chicago, is a part of these 2 kind of consolidated pension boards.
I would like to add that, so there is a police pension board and a fire pension board here at the city. So we meet quarterly. Both of those meetings are upcoming. I think one is, I was just looking, I was trying to find it. Police is upcoming soon, and this one, fire meets early August. So you're welcome to attend. It's a public meeting as well. And then there we go over kind of the financial reports that we get through IPOPIF and IFPIF.
But we don't make decisions as to where we're going to invest.
No, so they make the decisions at those 2 boards for the investments, but the decisions at the board level here is how much we transfer to that, because you have to hold some back for, you know, like we have to pay for the actuarial. So there is some administration of how much stays kind of in a checking account versus moving over into those consolidated funds.
The local board also does like adjudicating disability hearings and other administrative duties, but the investment operations does happen really at the consolidated board.
So my second question, I'm going to try to keep this brief.
No, take all the time you want. We have till midnight.
So my second question is, you mentioned the eligibility age, which was 50 plus 20 years of service. But there's also is there required retirement age?
Well, that's a good question. It's kind of, I'll say, a legal gray area. In general, most people would say 60, you pretty much have to retire by 65. Different municipalities, depending on whether they have home rule status or not, can kind of override that to allow firefighters or police officers to stay beyond 65. We see it's pretty rare to see anybody staying past age 65.
Okay, so now is that in there, the gap between those 2 numbers as to when most of them do retire?
Yeah, definitely. Essentially, the way that we run when we do an actuarial evaluation, tons of different assumptions are, a part of that model. One of the key assumptions that we utilize, for example, is retirement rates. So we essentially have everywhere from age 50 to age 65. We associate there's a probability or a percentage chance that a police officer or a retiree will retire in that year. We get those rates based on basically an assumption study that we do of all of the Illinois police and fire pension funds that we work with. So try to get basically the best estimate of when we expect to see members retiring from the funds.
And it's going to be different for each department, right?
We utilize generally the same assumption set for every fire and police pension fund that we utilize, that we work with. Very rare, but sometimes if we see like anomalous experience in one department, for example, we see, massive spikes in retirement at age 55, for example, or something like that, then we'll manually adjust that rate. But for the most part, we're utilizing, we have one assumption for fire, one assumption for police, and that's what we utilize for this year's valuation.
So that feeds into my last question I'll ask, and then I'll have many more for some time later. But why is fire and police managed differently? Why aren't we contributing the same percentages to each one? Why are they managed differently?
Yeah, good question. So I think it comes down to a lot of things. Number one, demographics is probably the easiest number. The easiest thing to identify, right, is that when we run an actuarial evaluation, it's kind of like as if we're determining for each individual member what's required to fund that member. So Joe the firefighter, right? How much is it going to take so that if we contribute every year for Joe, when he goes to retire at, let's just say 55, for example, right? If he starts at 25 and he's going to retire at 55, we're essentially saying, well, here's how much money we need to put into the pension fund today so that theoretically when he retires at 55, we'll have the dollars set aside to cover his future expected benefit payments for his remaining lifetime, could be approximately 30 years. Someone's 55, they're going to live to probably about 86 or so. And so really it's an individual member-based calculation. And so that, to start with, that's one of why the amounts vary, why funding levels vary. On top of that, especially pre-consolidation, the Fire and Police Pension Board had the authority to just make investment decisions. And so they could decide to take different amounts of risk, right? Maybe, and I don't know that this is true, but I'm just conjecturing, say, maybe the Police Pension Board theoretically would say, we want to be less risky. We want to be 50% in equity, 50% in fixed income, versus fire might want to do a 60-40 allocation. And so that can generate potentially different expected future returns, different returns on an annual basis. And so when there's essentially a true up every year to say, okay, we expect the fund to get 7%, but we know it's never going to get exactly 7%. And so that affects the development of the subsequent year's recommended contribution, different things like that. On top of that, different plan provisions for fire and police, they do vary slightly. And so that affects the amount, basically what the liability of the benefit is for the member as well. So tons of different factors ultimately lead to, fire and police being really treated separately in the determination of a recommended contribution. Great questions.
Thank you.
And much of this was statutorily set forth by the state.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Or questions that maybe were inspired after those lovely explanations as well? All right, then with that, thank you so much. We really appreciate the presentation. If you do have any other follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to Finance Director Molly Talkington. At this point, we'll move on to our ward reports. There is no mayoral's report this evening. Any ward reports? Yes, Alderman Boucher.
So the back to school supply drive that is going to be put out on July 25th for the students to come and collect supplies started this week. Drop off is here at City Hall, so if you have any school supplies, we're also looking for gently used or new backpacks for the kids, so if you have those, to bring them over. So that has already started. Also for residents of Ward 5, just came out today that the high school parking lot, everyone's going to be exiting out the back, so there might be an increase in traffic down Oak as they use the gate to go in and out of the high school instead of the front parking lot. So just a heads up for anyone there. And then August 13th, we're going to have popsicles in the park where you can come and hang out and ask about any questions you have about anything that's happening in the city. So that's just with me.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Any other ward reports? All right, with that, we do have one signatory on the public's comment sign-in sheet. So with that, I do want to preface the public meeting, the public minutes for our kind of rules and outlines, which is to say that in order to secure the rights of the citizens of the city to a fair and just representation before their elected officials, and to guarantee to the elected officials an order and dignified form in which to conduct the city's business, No person shall be allowed to engage in any activity that will disturb or disrupt the orderly proceedings of the City Council. Per the rules and procedures, the public is to address the City Council, and the fact that no member of the City Council responds does not mean that the City Council or any member thereof agrees or disagrees with the comment. In order to attain this objective, the following rules of conduct are hereby established. First, any person who seeks to address the City Council at this time for public comments shall be permitted to speak only upon recognition of the presiding officer, and such person shall adhere to the following provisions. Each person addressing the City Council shall state their name for the record. Each person shall be granted no more than 5 minutes of the allotted 20 minutes in order to address the City Council, and questions and/or commentary shall be limited to city business. Comments supporting or opposing a nominated person's candidacy for elective office of the city shall be out of order. Commentary shall be directed to the presiding officer unless the presiding officer permits the individual to address the council members or other city officers present, and discussion shall take place in a professional manner which displays mutual respect, and profanity shall not be used in any form or manner. So with that, Roxanne, please approach the podium.
Real slow, sorry.
Take your time.
Don't say that, you'll be here talking. I'm new at this, so I'm inappropriate. Please let me.
Sure.
I'm Roxanne Sumner. Library. And it's kind of a sales thing, I guess. If I'm advertising, please let me know if this is appropriate. But we're having a book sale. Our summer book sale is coming up this weekend. And I just wanted to promote this because it's a big deal for us and our library to support our library. We've done some amazing things with our library. We just last month had a fantastic introduction to our summer reading program. It was a massive turnout. We had over 600 people there. That's amazing for a one-day afternoon event. So I gave a bunch of flyers to Martha, and if you want, you can take one and take a couple and pass them to your friends this weekend. And the hours of the library are hours of the sale are on the pamphlet. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we are going to move on to our pending ordinances. The first item that we have is item A, ordinance number 23-32, which is to amend the City of Rolling Meadows compensation plan for the fiscal year 2023 to reflect the Finance Department reorganization in for second reading. Is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien, for the first.
Second.
And thank you, Alderman Veneziano, for the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is, shall the ordinance be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and none opposed, this ordinance is adopted. Moving on to item B, ordinance number 23-33 to modify the city's zoning ordinance concerning application requirements for amendments and for second reading. Is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Boucher.
Second.
And thank you, Alderman Reyes, for the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is, shall the ordinance be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
With 5 in favor, none opposed, this ordinance is adopted. Moving on to item C, ordinance number 23-34 to adopt licensing regulations for collection containers in for second reading. Is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien, for the first.
Second.
Thank you, Alderman Boucher, for the second. Will the clerk please, oh, I'm sorry. Is there any discussion regarding this ordinance? Okay. Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
With 5 in favor, none opposed, this ordinance is adopted. Item D, ordinance number 23-35 to modify the city's zoning ordinance repealing the regulation of collection boxes in for second reading. Is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Veneziano, for the first.
Second.
And thank you, Alderman Boucher, for the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is, shall the ordinance be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
With 5 in favor, none opposed, this ordinance is adopted. Item E, ordinance number 23-36 to establish vacant, condemned, and foreclosed property registration regulations and clarifying building-related public nuisances in for second reading. Is there a motion to adopt this ordinance?
So moved.
Oh, Alderman O'Brien for the first, and
Second.
and thank you, Alderman Reyes for the second. Any discussion regarding this ordinance? Seeing none, the question is, shall the ordinance be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and none opposed, this ordinance is adopted. This then brings us to our consent ordinances. There is about 6 items, F through K, listed at this point. Does any alderperson wish to remove any other item? Yes, Alderman Veneziano.
Item K.
Item K. Any others? Okay. Seeing the chair now declares it in order for one motion to consider the remaining 5 ordinances in one motion without debate. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien, for the first,
Second.
and thank you, Alderman Boucher, for the second. I will now read out the list of these items, which is item F, ordinance number 23-00, to adopt the purchasing manual for the City of Rolling Meadows and implementing said purchasing manual in the Rolling Meadows Municipal Code and for first reading. Item G, ordinance number 23-00, to amend the city code in order to allow for the city manager's execution of hold harmless agreements on behalf of the City of Rolling Meadows and for first reading. Item H, ordinance number 23-00, to clarify city code prohibitions pertaining to electronic sweepstakes machines and establishing specific fines for related violations and for first reading. Item I, ordinance number 23-00, to approve a special use for a drive-through at 1458 Gulf Road, Chipotle Mexican Grill, and for first reading. Item J, ordinance number 23-00, to amend the city code to declare obstructive drive-through restaurant queuing to be a public nuisance, and for first reading. And that is our list here. The question is, shall the ordinance be moved forward for second reading? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and unopposed, these ordinances will be moved for second reading. Can I also have a motion to bring forth item K, which was removed, ordinance number 23-00, to amend the zoning map of the City of Rolling Meadows, 5180 and 5101, 5199 Euclid Avenue?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Veneziano, for the first, and Alderman O'Brien for the second. Alderman Veneziano, you had pulled this item, so feel free to begin discussion.
Thank you. So after having a nice conversation today with Manager Sabo and reading the packet, I'm going to make a recommendation for an amendment to exclude address 5190, correct, on Euclid Avenue, so that there is no confusion when reading this ordinance, that property is not included in this new rezoning because that property is considered commercial.
Correct. Yeah, we'll include a clarifying component to the final approval ordinance for second reading that would clarify very explicitly that 5190 remains commercially zoned and not residentially.
Okay, before we begin with that, then there's a motion a proposed motion on the floor to amend. Is there a second for the amendment to exclude address 5190 from the new rezoning?
Second.
Alderman O'Brien has seconded that motion. Any discussion regarding the amendment? Yes, Alderman Kohler.
So looking through that, is that parcel the chiropractor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes, and I thought that was excluded though.
It was, and in order, because of the way that the ordinance is written, where it says commonly known as 5101 through 5199, to make it very clear that that address range does not include 5190. It refers only to the addresses on the south side, the odd numbered side of the street. We'll just include a clarifier in there to make it very clear that 5190 is excluded. So it doesn't change the outcome and substance really of the ordinance, but it does provide that clarification for anyone who is looking back on it or trying to get more information on what the action was that the council ultimately took.
Right, so that's similar to so I also questioned Manager Sabo on that, and that he said it was excluded, so we're on board.
I think it was very confusing looking at that range of 5100 to 5199, that anyone looking at it as a resident, myself, I read it 3 times. It can be very confusing and deceiving that property be included. So to add this amendment to it is plain and simple, black and white, that property is excluded.
Okay.
So.
Any additional comments? Okay, so with that, the question is, shall ordinance number 23-00 to amend the zoning map of the City of Rolling Meadows, 5180 and 5101 through 5199 on Euclid Avenue, excluding address 5190, be amended?
Moved.
Will the clerk please call the roll? We got the motions.
Okay.
Yeah.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
Okay, with 5 in favor and none opposed, the ordinance is amended. And so as amended, we now bring back that same ordinance number as listed for item K. Is there any discussion regarding moving this ordinance onto second reading? Excuse me. Okay, seeing no discussion, the question is, shall item K be moved on to second reading? Will the clerk please call the roll?
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
5 in favor and none opposed, this ordinance will be moved forward to second reading. This brings us to new business, which is a motion to approve a payment of bills on warrant for June 27th, 2023 and July 11th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve the warrants?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien for the first.
Second.
And Alderman Boucher for the second. Is there any discussion regarding approving the bills on warrant? Seeing none, the question is, shall the warrants be approved? Will the clerk please call the roll?
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
5 in favor, none opposed. These warrants are approved. And then this brings us to our consent resolutions as well. We have 6 items M through R. Is there any alderperson who wishes to remove one of the items? Yes, Alderman Boucher.
N.
And as in Nancy.
Yes.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Then, seeing no additional requests for removal, the chair declares it in order for one motion to consider the 5 resolutions in one motion without debate. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Veneziano for the first and Alderman O'Brien for the second. The list includes item M, resolution number 23-R-90, to approve and ratify a hold harmless and indemnification declaration with respect to Arthur J. Gallagher and Company at 2850 Gulf Road. Item O, resolution number 23-R-92, to authorize the purchase of ammunition of assorted calibers for the police department for the remainder of the year from Keesler Police Supply. Item P, resolution number 23-R-93, to award a construction contract to Lenny Hoffman Excavating for water main replacement at 3000 Kirchhoff Road behind the Jewel Shopping Center, an amount of $254,947.00. Item Q, resolution number 23-R-94, to authorize the award of contract for fiscal year 2023 street maintenance and annual pavement restorative seal application PRA with corrective asphalt materials, CIM, in a not to exceed amount of $67,522.35. And item R, resolution number 23-R-95, to approve a professional services agreement with Hampton, Lenzini, and Renwick Incorporated at 2023 Building Official and Permit Review Services. The question is, shall the resolutions be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and none opposed, the resolutions are adopted. May I please have a motion to review item N? Thank you, Alderman Boucher for the first.
Second.
And thank you, Alderman Veneziano for the second. So again, this is resolution number 23-R-91 to approve a 2-year contract for 5 fixed license plate recognition LPR cameras with Flock Group Incorporated. Alderman Boucher, you pulled this. Please begin the discussion.
Just due to professional conflict of interest, I wanted to pull out my vote for this as I work for somebody in this market and am directly involved in the use of these at work, so I wanted to pull myself out of voting on that measure.
An abstention from the vote.
So
Okay.
I didn't want to abstain from the rest of them.
Okay. I'll still call your name.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you for the notification. Any additional discussion regarding this item? Okay, seeing none, the question is, shall resolution number 23-R-91 be adopted? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Boucher.
Abstain.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
With 4 in favor and 1 abstention, this resolution is adopted. This now brings the council to other business and reports. We have 2 mayoral appointments this evening, and we will, I would rather declare it in order for one motion to consider the 2 appointments and one motion without debate. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Alderman Veneziano for the first.
Second.
And thank you, Alderman Boucher, for the second. The individuals that we have here our Director Aaron Groskamp for Capital Projects Committee, and also Director of Finance Molly Talkington for the Capital Projects Committee as well. And the question is, shall the appointments be approved? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and unopposed, the appointments are approved. There are no mayoral proclamations today. Any city clerk report? There is not. And that brings us to city staff reports. And our first is the community items of interest, to which we will defer to City Manager Rob Sabo.
Thank you, Mayor. The fun continues this Friday at the Fridays Rock Concerts at Kimball Hill Park. Bring your lawn chair and a blanket to enjoy the classic rock tunes from the opening band, Mike and Tracy, at 6 p.m. and Rosie and the Rivets at 8 p.m. Come hungry and try delicious fares from popular food vendors, and adult beverages will now be served by Krebs Place. Thank you to Rolling Meadows Park District for sponsoring opening bands and for the use of their property. For questions, please visit the city's website at cityrm.org. The city is requesting public input on business attraction as part of a business development strategic plan currently underway. The city's Economic Development Committee will be hosting a public input booth at the July 14th Fridays Rock event in Kimball Hill Park, with an online survey also available, which can be accessed through the city's website on its homepage at cityrm.org. For more information, please contact the city's business development manager, Martha Corner, at cornerm, that's CORNERM, at cityrm.org, or by calling 847-870-9004. A free outdoor movie, snacks, fun, and games are all happening on Saturday, July 29th with the Rolling Meadows Police Department. This year's Movie Night with the Cops will feature Minions, The Rise of Gru at 7 p.m. behind the Community Center at 3705 Pheasant Drive. Visit the city's website for more information. Lastly, our council chamber improvements are on track. Drywall work and mud work have all been substantially completed. At this stage, we are now moving on to electrical work, including lighting installations and AV work. We anticipate being back in council chambers for our meetings either at the August Committee of the Whole or the second council meeting in August. But that project is on track, and we are working with the contractor to continue moving that forward expeditiously. That's all for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, City Manager Rob Sabo. We also have the May 2023 financial report. Please be advised that the financial report is in the agenda packet, and if council has any questions, please contact Finance Director Molly Talkington. For our June 2023 new business report, I will defer to Business Development Manager Martha Corner.
Thank you, Mayor Snyder. I'm pleased to announce 8 new businesses for the month of June. Among them, I'm very pleased to announce a new fine dining Italian restaurant, Casa di Luigi, located at 5500 New Wilkie Road, the former Grande Jakes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we now have our July 18th, 2023 Committee of the Whole draft agenda, which was included as well in the packet. City Manager Rob Sabo, what do we have so far?
Sure. There's one item included in the Committee of the Whole draft agenda packet, which includes a discussion of a needs assessment as well as existing conditions for social services within our community, as well as a discussion on next steps on the possibility of establishing a human services department within the city of Rolling Meadows as part of our budget development and work towards 2024. So that'll be a substantial presentation and conversation with the council about that initiative.
Thank you very much. And then similarly, for the July 25th, 2023 City Council draft agenda, what should we look forward to?
Sure. The draft agenda includes a few items. It is still a little bit early, so there are likely going to be additional items added to this draft agenda. At this time, the draft includes the second reads on the ordinances which were approved this evening. In addition to that, there's an ordinance to update the city's fueling station spiller ordinance, as well as a resolution to approve the purchase of council chamber furniture as part of our updates to that room. Both the Committee of the Whole agenda as well as the regular city council agenda will be posted in accordance with the Open Meetings Act in advance of the meetings.
Thank you. At this point, we're at matters not on the agenda. Are there any matters not on? Yes, go ahead, Alderman Boucher.
We had a library board meeting today. The library did vote to extend and change the hours starting in the fall. So you will be looking at shorter Fridays, but more hours on Sundays. So be looking for announcements from that. And they did talk about the huge success for the summer reading program. They gave away 600 ice creams. They're really excited about that turnout as well. And their book sale is this weekend as well. They wanted to make sure everyone knew about that.
Thank you very much, Alderman Boucher. Anything else for matters not on the agenda? Okay, seeing nothing else, we do have a request to go into closed session under Chapter 5 of the ILCS 120-2 C 1 or 12 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. which is the establishment of reserves or settlements of claims as provided in the Local Governmental and Governmental Employees Tort Immunity Act. If otherwise, the disposition of a claim or potential claim might be prejudiced, or the review of discussion of claims, loss or risk management information, records, data, advice, or communications from or with respect to any insurer of the public body or any intergovernmental risk management association or self-insurance pool of which the public body is a member. Do I have a motion to go into closed session? Thank you, Alderman Veneziano for the first and Alderman O'Brien for the second. Is there any discussion about going into closed session? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Kohler.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Veneziano.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
5 in favor, none opposed. We will now enter into closed session. The audience and press are advised that we do not anticipate taking any action upon returning to open session. Thank you.
So do you?
Right across the hall.
I'm ready for a
I
nap.
think we're still live broadcasting, everybody.
And then I'll get the rest tomorrow.
Anybody want a book sale?
Anybody want to-